In this episode of the Inner Circle podcast, we are going to dive in deep into the tech of Ed Lachman's EL Zone system. And what's so beautiful is he's taking something that's very analog and he's bringing it to the digital age. So we can actually understand 2 stops down, 3 stops down, 4 stops over. What do these all look like? So we're using kind of the film language of exposures and bringing that to digital. We're going to dive into all these different readings. We're going to go through how IRE values and waveform monitors and false colors are not very specific, and they're also not consistent over monitor platforms. All right, let's dive into this, Ed. How you doing, Ed?
Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. So I like to just get right to it. We know your slate of amazing imagery as a cinematographer, and we are going to talk all about the tech today, and specifically the EL Zone system that you've kind of created. So kind of tell me a little bit about this system.
Well, I'm not that technical, so I'll start like 50 years ago when I was in art school and I decided I wanted to create images photographically. I wanted to figure out how do you create a style, a look with latitude and exposure. You know, when I looked around at my environment, when I looked at paintings, when I looked at photographs, when I looked even at other films, it was like a mystery to me, how do you create that exposure range and latitude? So I kind of referenced something that I was studying at the time, which was Ansel Adams' zone system, in where he was able to place the negative where he wanted the exposure to read the shadow detail and to read the highlight detail and not lose one for the other. And so I created my own system, which I brought a reference back then, where I would shoot Polaroids. There were 3,000 ASA Polaroids. Okay. And my gaffer, John DeBlau, who I still work with, worked out on the back of the Polaroid camera what ASA I worked with to what stop, that there was a scale that would equate what the exposure. Okay. Now, in a weird way, when I thought about this, these Polaroids were almost like 709 rec.
Right.
Because they didn't have the range that a negative would have, but they would put me in the area of where I had exposure.
Yeah, I saw the Polaroid as almost throwing a LUT on it.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So I would write the ASA of the film stock. This was, 5296.
Okay, yeah.
And I would read it with my spot meter, because all my interiors I would use a spot meter and an instant meter outdoors. I kind of learned that from Sven Nyquist. He would always light his interiors with a Pentax 5 spot meter.
Okay.
And then I would write the actual stop on the Polaroid, so I had a visual reference, which now you can do through your camera, because really your camera is your spot meter today. It's right. Really your camera is what all this work was for me to write it. Then I would write in my book,
Yep, I'm right alongside with you. I did the book of light.
Where the lights were, where the ASA was, where the exposure was. So I had a reference, because, we're always faced with coming back to re-photograph or recreate what we've already shot on that location. So another thing about this that came about, because I didn't know this would work digitally, but I was kind of thrown to the wolves when the digital world came in. It was like, wow, how do I understand exposure in the digital world with a sensor? Because now I have a DIT telling me what my exposure should be.
Right.
Or I have a camera manufacturer telling me green, everything is good. That doesn't help me. I don't know what's good. You know, I want to be the judge of that range of exposure and the subtlety of the exposure. Because when I shot in film, I had the creative ability to adjust the look by the ASA I shot the film, the lenses, the feeling of the lenses, and the way I worked with the lab.
Yeah, whether you're pushing or pulling.
And then the way I use my light meter. So all those things were factors to the way I created the image, which now in the digital world, do I have those abilities to do this? So I was very fortunate because I've been talking about this for over 10 years to different camera manufacturers because for selfish reasons, I just wanted it in the camera if it could be done. So I knew what I was doing visually in the digital. I didn't know anybody else would be interested in it. And actually, Barry Russo at Panasonic was one of the first people to get it. He started out as a DIT and loved the idea. But it was very hard to show people what this could be because IRE and false color, which I call false exposure, everybody has a different interpretation of what false color is. The colors are not the same for manufacturer.
At all.
Even the percentage of IRE is not the same between manufacturers. And guess what? When I did the research, what IRE stands for, it's the International Radio Engineers from 1895 that tracked lightning. So we're, as cameramen, we are judging our exposure on radio signals. That doesn't sound so good.
No.
You know, that's not what my...
When I looked that up, it was so funny because I'm like, what does IRE stand for? We all talk about it. So I deep dive as well. And I'm like, what is going on here?
Right. And then, all right, so now we have waveform monitors. Well, yes, they show you the curvature of the exposure, but they don't map the exposure of exactly what your frame is.
Correct.
So when Small HD came on board with this, it was godsend because now I could map the exact exposure of the frame in stops because everything that we work with is still in stops.
Correct.
The way you communicate to your gaffer. I don't talk to a gaffer, I need IRE such and such number on. We talk in stops. If you use a meter or not, your camera is your light meter.
Exactly. Hey, give me another half stop out of that backlight.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So on the set, we still talk in stops. Even when you're in post, you talk in stops about how you want to bring it down or bring it up. So for me, it answered all the questions, but I didn't really know if it would work until they got it in the monitor, until Panasonic got it in their camera. And now it's kind of taking off. Now the manufacturers that I've been talking to for years get it. You know, before they go, hey, IRE and our waveform monitors are fine. We don't need anything else in the camera, you know. But that's where I am with it.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about when I transitioned from film to digital, there was this big learning curve with understanding what the stops are based on, you know, the grayscale, based on this IRE thing. And false color was really the only way I was able to get in there in regarding to understanding where my exposure was. And with Flanders, I was able to at least move the scale.
Right.
It wasn't just baked in like most monitors. It's just baked in. You can't change it.
Right.
But with Flanders, you can change where you want your blacks to, you know, crush. You can where your highlights, you know, clip. You can, and then you can adjust that grayscale. So that made it a lot easier. But this is a no-brainer for cinematographers. That immediately we're going to know, oh, that's 6 over? Okay, gotcha, you know? And then when you pitched this to me, when you said, hey, Shane, I want to come in and talk about this, I was like, oh my God, think about how easy it's going to be to do pickups, to do additional photography. Because right now, all I'm doing is taking a screen grab. And that screen grab, I'm trying to analyze the ratios. Now, of course, you can put it on a monitor side by side and you can get it very close. But the whole scenario is now I know exactly what my contrast ratio is.
Yeah.
And with a light meter, I match
Why
it.
don't we show you just on you right here? I brought my spot meter. My
Yeah,
trusty
let's do
spot
that.
Meter, and maybe we could just, you know, seeing is believing.
Okay, so
All
there
right,
I
so
am.
There you are. Now, I am going to read we're at 800.
800 ISO.
All right. So I would say it's about, it's 4.3.
Okay. And then if we go over to your scale.
And the scale is right on the monitor, so, you know, there's no question. So the most important part of this is the 18% gray, because that's the, you know, the center of our exposure range. And then what I did is I made it half a stop on either side of the 18% gray, because for me, the most important part is the flesh tone, where you're placing the flesh tone.
Right.
So we'll look at this. So like, the highlight on your forehead is a half a stop to a stop. We're 18% gray here, and now we're a half a stop down here to a stop. Now, I did something else where I did a lot of beta testing, and there are other systems that try to do this, but they're based on IRE. And the problem with IRE versus logarithmic stops is, and this is a very important part, is IRE is linear. It's 0 to 1 or 0 to 10.
Right.
So 2 to 2.8 is 0 to 1. 2.8 to 4, 0 to 1. And that's why there's always a discrepancy when you use your meter on the set.
No, nothing ever matches.
It never matches. But logarithmic means you double the amount of light. When you go 2 to 2.8, you've doubled the amount of light. When you go 2.8 to 4, you've doubled the amount of light. This takes into consideration what you're doing logarithmic.
Think about from a light standpoint. If I want another stop, say I have a 5K that's keying us.
Right.
If I want another stop, I need to add another 5K.
Exactly.
I can't add a 2K.
Right.
I have to add another 5K to actually add one stop.
Exactly.
It's a lot of people don't really understand that sometimes.
Well, I think what happened was engineers that created the electronic medium of what these cameras are, which they did a brilliant job, never really thought in the analog world.
Right.
So I'm using the analog world to understand the digital world for myself.
Right.
You know, it was, I'm not that brilliant, but it was just like, how do I understand what I'm doing?
Right.
All right. So this only goes out to 6 stops. So the reason I did that is because I found if you have more colors, it gets confusing in the viewfinder, because
Right.
you also can see this in the viewfinder, especially like doc guys or if you don't have a DIT, right? So another thing I did is dark color, light color, dark color, light color. So again, you see the distinction between a half a stop to a stop, but even though it's in the same family. So the solution to this is that you'll hit another button. This is a button that you could save. You could hit another button, and these stops on the outer over or under will be 2 stops, because that is as important. You just want to know you have detail out here.
Right.
So this could be 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6. Then you're at 7. Or if you want to make it 3 stops. So that way you still will maintain the same color spectrum. And it's a standard. I want people to be able to understand this, that they can go from an Arri to a Sony to a Red, have different cameras, even still cameras on that will all have the same language for exposure, to create the looks.
And that's the cool thing within the small HD. You can select the exact camera that you're using. You can then select the color spaces that you're using. So it is as accurate as possible. And I love this half stop thing, because when you and I were exposing film, I always overexposed my film on the norm,
Right,
correct?
right.
A half stop.
So you would have better printer lights.
Exactly.
And in the digital world, you probably want to go a half down so you have the information.
Correct. Yes.
Exactly. And the other thing is that you can train yourself like, hey, I like the flesh tone a stop down to 2 stops down, or I like and then you can be consistent between the scenes.
Correct.
Or like I say, you can go back a month, 6 months, a year and recreate exactly. Because I've talked to a number of cinematographers that, oh, I don't use a light meter. I go, great. But how about if you could recreate exactly the exposure in the set or on location, because you have a frame grab tracking that exact exposure? They go, oh, I could use that.
Exactly. I mean, you're always doing additional photography, you know, that goes to the test screening, and the test screening says, oh, I'm confused here. And then you have to go and you have to shoot a little stuff to try and clean it up and make sure that the audience understands. We've all done those kind of pickups and reshoots. But then there's also the kind of, you know, splinter unit kind of stuff. So we've shot on a set and we've already gone, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we forgot that close-up. Bring the desk in here, manipulate the light, match the light for this close-up. Well, if you have the ratios that you can pull up on your screen grab of that scene that you shot, well, now it just is plug and play. You're able to match the ratios exactly, and you're able to pick up these shots, and they're seamlessly cut in.
How often do you have to give it off to another cinematographer?
No, that's exactly right.
And you give them a reference, say, hey, that's how I exposed it. So it isn't like you're getting, well, he did something different than I did.
Right.
He'll have a direct reference for this.
You're uniting everyone on one system. Just like anything works better when there's not 99 people making a movie. We're just trying to make one movie, one script.
And another thing that I didn't even realize was post facilities are reaching out to me to put this in. So they have a better communication with the image makers, either when they're transferring it and they can give them the information of, and sometimes you get a different DIT. So he has a different way he wants to expose your negative because he's trying to protect his area.
Yep.
And you go, no, I want the flesh down, stop down in dark green. I don't want it in yellow because I know I can print it down. It's going to look different.
Right.
So what's interesting about this is, wow, you're wearing 18% gray. There's a cameraman for you.
Well, I thought I'd do that for this interview.
Well, that's nice. and you're wearing a black shirt. And look, it's got 4 stops down. There is information in that black shirt. I never would have known that if I,
right,
you know.
And the other thing is, you know, when we went from film to digital, you know, we would be discussing with the lab every day, what are my printer lights? Where, you know, we would always be having that conversation with our color timer at the lab. And, you know, when I go in and build my lookup tables for digital, I'm always working with the colorist, and they say, Shane, let's just do lift, gamma, and gain, which is basically printer lights. I'm not going into secondaries. I'm not getting any bells and whistles of window technology and any of that stuff. I'm just going with printer lights. And that's the way you keep a very consistent look throughout, by you building your LUTs, quote unquote, your show LUT, and then you have your CDLs that you can apply on top of that to make it, you know, blue green or, you know, whatever you want.
Right.
But they're still working in the vein of printer lights to this day, even with all this digital technology.
Well, the other cool thing for me is you can shoot at different ASAs, different camera speeds. 18% gray is 18%
gray.
Or if the monitor is off, the monitor isn't set up properly, you're still going to see 18% gray.
Right. Exactly. No, this is genius. I love this. And this is also, you know, I think about to all the young director of photographies coming up the ladder. I mean, this is going to start to bring that. It's like how I light as well. I'm using a lot of the old school lights mixed with the new technology.
Right.
And that's a beautiful marriage. And this is using standard of stops, which everyone knows what that is.
That's what the photographic medium was set up to.
Exactly.
You know, and you know, an EL, I want people to know, EL is not my initials.
I thought it was for sure Ed Lachman.
Well, it's exposure latitude.
It's so good. So where do you go from now? So you are obviously talking to other, you know, camera manufacturers and stuff. How is that all going?
Well, basically, I've talked to everybody, and I feel like David and Goliath. They kind of get it, but of course, do they really want to like put something else in the camera? Do they want to pay a small licensing fee? I've patented this. I've trademarked it because it's kind of what I wanted to give back to the industry, because this is the way I learned or taught myself. And I just thought, what I don't understand about the digital world, this made sense to me. And I have the time now that I'd like to like present this. So for me, if people, what they basically said to me is, if people say they want it, we can put it in the camera. So the more people that can reach out to Arri, Sony, Red, even though they've all said, yes, we're interested, they'll put it in the cameras. I mean, thank God it's in small HD, but so you can use it on any camera, but it will be the most accurate, and you'll have less setup time, that you know it's in the camera.
Right. That way I'm looking at the EVF and I'm seeing it in there.
Yeah, it's right there.
On the monitor.
So that to me. So if I get anything out of this interview, I just would love people to respond to the camera manufacturer, say, hey, why can't we have this in, you know, your cameras?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just see, you know, such a great learning experience of really associating how, you know, not just in a IRE factor of, oh, you're four in the blacks. No, I want to know I'm -6. I'm under 6 stops under in the blacks. That's something that is relatable to everyone. And, you know, you think about, like what you were showing us, the book of light, and how you put where you positioned and your ratios, basically your contrast, right? Are you 2 stops down? Are you 3 stops down? Whatever on the face, all these different things. And I think that more than anything, every film has this situation where you're going back and you're having to recreate something that you've already done. Sometimes 6 months, sometimes 8 months later. And, you know, it's like I had to, you know, I would have my gaffer make all those notes. I would go out and take the light meter readings. Everyone's like, Shane, why are you still using a light meter? It's digital.
Yeah.
What you see is what you get.
Right.
And I was like, yes, but if I have to come back and match that, I need to know what my ratios are. I need to know what the color temp is. And now, you know, the metadata doesn't track either. Like if I'm shooting with red on this metadata, and then all of a sudden that's gone, goes to the Avid, and then the raw files are generated and they're put into DPX files for color correction, all the metadata is lost. I don't know if that camera was shot at 3200 or 3700 Kelvin. I don't know what any of that metadata is. So I was like, okay, how can I track all this? And I basically did it analog. But now you're taking an analog system and now bringing it into the high-tech world of digital, and then being able to customize it per camera and right on the monitor.
Well, you know, there's something I thought about when I showed this early on to camera manufacturers. They were like, oh, yeah, this can work, but I don't want everyone to know what the latitude of our cameras are. I think there was resistance in the beginning because now you really can track where the exposure is on the sensor. But now the sensors are very good in all the cameras, so
Yeah.
they're not so defensive about that.
No,
But
exactly. This is how they were, and now they've come to like that.
So, but I think in the beginning, people were hesitant to embrace this because they realized that would, again, I want to put the control of the image back to the cinematographer.
Correct.
We're slowly, it's all ebbing away from us. You know?
It is. And I want to be able to be in the moment on the camera, being able to see what I'm shooting and my composition and know that exposure. I don't want to have to always rely on going back to that tent. I hate that tent. I hate going in there. It detaches.
Well, it takes you away from what you should be looking at.
And it detaches you away from the actor, the director. I want to, that's why I have my little innovative deploy cart where I can push that thing in as close to the action as possible. So I'm very close to the director. I have the director right next to me. So we're looking at color calibrated monitors. What you see is what you get. We're selecting the LUTs and all that. But now with this tool, I'm able to show the exposure. I'm able to, talk to the director, say, okay, we're going silhouette here, right?
Right. You know what we could do? Why don't you go on it and we'll change the exposure?
Oh, yeah.
That would be fun to watch. Bring it down a stop or two, and we'll see. Bring it down a stop, and we'll see if it tracks. Yeah. All right, so look at that. You're still getting information. That's a stop down, half a stop down. Your hair is 4 stops down to 5 stops down.
Yeah, and then if we go back to the log file, I mean, that's definitely a very underexposed image.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you still have information.
Exactly. Correct.
And go the other way on the overside.
There's 11.
Yeah, just keep going.
8.
Yeah, just keep going. I just want to see. So here we're a half a stop to a stop. Whoa. So we know we still have information that's 3 to 4 stops over in the red
right
and the orange.
Yeah.
And then you're a stop and a half a stop over there.
Yeah, and you're still holding that detail in this light because that's only 5 stops over. So you're able to see all that detail in that fixture.
And the last film I did was in black and white. Actually, Ari made a monochromatic LF. That was the first one that we tested.
Yeah, that's a good image. That's not a bad exposure right there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I felt like Ansel Adams exposing black and white and being able to reference the zone system with black and white. That was like a godsend. I didn't want to go back and shoot in color anymore because it was such a great intuitive way of interpreting what the exposure should be.
Right. That's great. Awesome. All right, so we're getting the camera companies on board. You're bringing around a sign-up sheet so we can,
Well, yeah, I want to show them that people get it. So
are
far,
invested in
every
this.
rental company I've shown this to in L.A., because I came out here for the beginning of the year. I live in New York still, has signed it and went on board with it.
That's great.
So now I'm just reaching out to the cinematographers that I know and respect and see what they think and get their input. Because I've had this for years, but not to the point where I could really show it to people how it works.
Right.
And now that people see it works, even if they say, I don't use the light meter, I use my eye, great. But you have a reference now when you go in to reshoot something or to communicate to somebody else what you're doing.
I mean, I'm just thinking about this in a wild way. So what you created with the Book of Light and writing down all that, now what I would do on set is I would just make sure that I, for my, resources, I would want to take a picture of the image, right? Then I would throw this on there take a screen grab of that, and then file that. And that almost becomes my digital book of light.
That's it. That's
right?
all it is. And you
that's
just have
all
that
you
as a
need.
reference. You always know what these stops represent.
Correct.
And that's why it's very important to me that every manufacturer, wherever this goes, uses the same colors.
Consistent colors.
So then everybody knows what the colors represent.
Yeah.
And
No,
it's
that's
in
brilliant.
the viewfinder. And
Yeah.
for docs, it's great. They can immediately figure out their exposure in a doc situation.
And so many times you're on set and you're outside, and the clouds come in, or the sun breaks out, and you're always trying to adjust that exposure on the fly. You might have dialed it in beautifully with the DIT when the sun was in the clouds, but then all of a sudden it pops up, and now it's a big scramble. And obviously we have iris controls to be able to do all that stuff, but this is a peace of mind to know that the exposure is right on, and I can see my scale, and I know exactly where I'm exposing.
Well, that's interesting. I never thought of that. The idea of modulating your exposure on the fly when how many times we change our exposure when we're moving the camera.
Yes.
That's true. I've used it that way on the last film. I was watching this to modify what the exposure was.
Exactly. While he's you're doing a long shot.
Yeah, like I'm going interior, exterior.
Yeah.
It was a much more intuitive way for me to see what I was doing.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic.
Well, thank
what
you.
else you got for me? You got any other things you want to throw at me? You're like a magician here.
No, I think this is... The important part is that people understand IRE is linear and doesn't track exposure the way light is tracked in stops. That's the game changer. If people understand that, they'll understand why this is what we've been missing in the digital world.
Absolutely. I totally see that, and I love the fact that one of the aspects that I use with my gaffer, we'll be by my deploy cart, and say we're doing a green screen shot, and I'll sit there and I'll go, okay, I'm going to finesse the lighting here. You get that green screen, and all I say is most of the time when I'm doing green screen, I underexpose it a stop to 2 stops.
Exactly.
So I'm like, just make the green screen green.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And, right? And then I can go off and I can do that, and he or she can use that tool to dial in that instead of doing spot metering and all that stuff. You're able to, that upper corner there, take that sky panel down, 5 points up in the upper right. Number 3, down 5, and then boom, all of a sudden the whole green screen goes green. And then so it's like you're leveraging the technology that we used to do with spot meters and all that stuff to know where it is, and now we're able to pass that off to your gaffer to dial that in, and we can continue.
Your camera is your spot meter.
Correct.
I mean, the next thing I'm working on, it's already been done, but we have to implement it, is I'm putting it in an app. So now you can go with your iPhone on location, in prep, whatever, look around and go, oh, maybe I don't need a light there. I got enough light from the detail of the window coming in.
Right.
Or not. Or, hey, yeah, maybe I need a 18K here. It will be another way you can store information in pre-production with your iPhone without carrying a lot of equipment with you to create the image later.
Oh, I mean, I love that. People don't realize the power of these devices. I mean, there's so much these little things can do, and it really is.
Well, you can even. Somebody told me it's a spot meter. They have
they have a spot and a light meter for this thing. It actually goes right into this port. And I mean, what the heck?
And you got Armitage, with the frame.
The framing. I love that.
Well,
you got Filmic Pro, which is like a app that you can shoot a log file on it, and now this thing will do ProRes. Shoot ProRes 4K.
Well, just saw the thing that Ridley Scott shot, like 200 megapixels, you
Yeah.
know, with a galaxy or whatever. I mean, give me a break. What do we need? We don't need, all we need are, well, we don't even need, you know, actors anymore. They're all like digitized anyway in Avatar. So
Right.
anyway, this is,
Well,
I
it was-
appreciate you having me here, and I've been a fan of what you've been doing. And
Oh, well, thank you so much, Ed, and
So-
right back at you. And I really love how much you invest the time in, you know, really creating this tool for up-and-coming cinematographers and for seasoned cinematographers and everything to understand, hey, finally, I got it to a stop and not an IRE,
Right.
you know, International Radio Engineers scale.
Well, it gives me something to do in my old age.
It was an
Thanks.
absolute pleasure.
Thank
All
you.
right. That concludes our episode with Ed Lachman and his EL Zone system with the small HD in the Inner Circle podcast.